This is a Flying Cow production.
There was a man named Worrell, Ernest P. Worrell. Let's celebrate this champion.
Well, hello and welcome to our Patreon exclusive podcast, Around the Worrell, our Ernest podcast about Ernest. Where we are going to be talking about all things Ernest P. Worrell. I am, of course, your host, the Flying Cow himself, Clay Johnson, and here with me, co-hosting this particular podcast, is the litigator, Lauren Collins. Lauren, how are you, sir?
I am excited to be here, Clay, to go through these movies and to do a podcast series. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah. You know, I told you when I asked you to do this podcast, when I thought of this, for some reason, you were the first name that popped into my head. And I was like, I don't know if he even knows Ernest, but let me just ask. And I mean, I believe you do. You are quite aware of Ernest.
I very much am. I wish I knew what it was that made my name come to your mind, but I'm glad it did.
I mean, I will say, I was thinking about it later, and you know what? I'm like, you know what? I think part of what it is, one of the running gags of Ernest was his friend Vern, who was a character that we never saw, but by all implications that we were aware of, he seemed to be a little bit more well-off than Ernest, a little bit more sophisticated, a little bit more like basically, Ernest was, his childhood friend that he basically just couldn't quite get rid of. And I think the thing is that you remind me who Vern might be. Someone like you who, you just you're doing all right, but maybe you have those friends that are a little less well off.
Yes. I'll tell you this. I won't spoil it right now, but when I was reading up for this episode here, I came across a little factoid about Vern that I will share later when we start talking about the yeah.
Nice.
It plays into that a little bit.
Well, and I've always kind of seen myself a little bit as an Ernest type. So I guess we're just the perfect pair to be doing this. Now, I will say this episode of the podcast is going to be available to everyone. Once the podcast gets going, it is going to be a Patreon exclusive. However, and it is going to be exclusive to the $10 tier. I believe that's the Jumping Cow. However, I thought it would be a great idea just to let everybody know exactly what we're doing and what you can expect from this podcast, to let it be free to everyone who listens, and maybe incentivize you to join the Patreon to get a little bit more, because I think we're gonna have a lot of fun with this one. So what this episode basically is gonna be is kind of us setting up, what the podcast is kind of gonna be about, what we're gonna be doing, and also kind of to introduce the character of Ernest. There might be some people out there that don't know who Ernest is. Unfortunately, Jim Varney, who played Ernest P. Worrell, died in, I believe, 1999.
It was early 2000.
Oh, okay.
I don't know that.
Oh, that's right.
Looking at Wikipedia,
you're right. Yeah, it is.
Yes.
It is 2000. I was not thinking. Yeah, but it was it was early in the year 2000. I knew it was close. But yeah, died in the year 2000. The year 2000. Yes. So died in the year 2000. So there might be a lot of, we have an entire generation basically that at least haven't been alive around the time that Jim Varney was alive. So who knows if they watched any of those old Ernest movies?
I was listening to one of your podcasts earlier today, one of the other episodes, and your co-host that episode was born in '99. So I think that's a safe bet. Yes.
Yes. So we are going to be going through all of the films. We're going to be talking about every major piece of Ernest kind of projects, content,
ephemera.
Yeah, mostly films. There was actually a television show. We are going to talk about that. But I thought it would be a good idea before we get rolling into, describing Ernest, talking about Jim Varney, all of his early work, things like that, for us to kind of give our background on Ernest, why we are doing this podcast, basically. What connection we have to Ernest, maybe our earliest memories, where we first discovered the character of Ernest. So, Lauren, we will start with you. What is your background with the great Ernest P. Worrell?
Well, I'm old enough to have encountered Ernest when he was originally putting out the movies and the TV show, in fact. I don't know for certain which of the movies might have been the first one I saw in theaters. I know for a fact I saw Ernest Goes to Jail in theaters. I might have seen Christmas. I definitely saw Ernest Scared Stupid in the theaters as well.
Okay.
And I know I watched Hey Ernest, his television show when it aired. So yeah, I was taking in a lot of that Ernest material as it was coming out before he moved to straight to video. And on a more personal level, when my family got a black lab when I was in 8th or 9th grade, somewhere in that range, and we had to, first time my family had gotten a dog. We had to name it, and we named it my suggestion, which was the name of Ernest's dog in the movies, which was Rimshot. So yes, just like Ernest, our pet dog was named Rimshot for all the years we had him in the Collins household.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. I gotta say, for me, I definitely saw the original, the first film that I knew of, which was Ernest Goes to Camp. But I have a distinct memory watching that movie, already knowing who Ernest was. So I'm pretty sure that I would have seen him in some of his commercial work. I know my dad was familiar with him from his commercial work. Ernest was kind of one of those indelible characters in my household. Ernest was a household name in my family. And honestly, a huge inspiration to me. When it comes to, character work and things like that, there are probably a handful of big inspirations for me. There is, most people just a little bit younger than me. It was, Jim Carrey. I never really cared for Jim Carrey, never really got onto that Jim Carrey train. For me, it was Gene Wilder from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Danny Kaye, Red Skelton, and Ernest, Jim Varney. Those were my big four.
Your Mount Rushmore of influences. Yes,
those were my big influences, and you can tell they're all kind of known for the rubber face gimmick. They're all kind of known for having big. I mean, maybe not so much Gene Wilder. He was more, this sarcastic, sardonic, kind of thing. But still, that kind of over the top, whimsical character. This is where I come from.
Yes.
So yeah, like I said, Ernest is definitely a big part of that. I remember being a child trying to do that. I still can't get as long as he does, but I can
Yes.
make it sound pretty good.
You're doing a pretty good job at the sound, I admit. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Ew.
Yeah, somehow he made his lips just a long
Mhm.
and did it. Oh, I don't know how I did it.
Yes.
It's insane. But I would practice that all the time. Watched all of this. So yeah, Ernest, huge influence for me. I actually remember hearing about that he died in it was either the year he died or maybe like right after, and I told my dad, and we were both just like, oh, that's too bad. Like it was a thing. It was like kind of a sad thing. Like I remember the day that I heard that Jim Henson passed.
Mhm.
He passed the same day as Sammy Davis Jr. I can
Mm.
tell you that not because I had a big thing for Sammy Davis Jr.,
You
but
keep a
just
journal.
because,
Yes.
just because it was connected to me. I knew who Sammy Davis Jr. was, but not nearly as much as Jim Henson.
Yes.
And Jim Varney passing was very similar. It was kind of it's like, have you ever had one of those times where you hear about a celebrity death and it just kind of brings you down for the whole rest of the day?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sense. And part of the sadness of Jim Varney's death, as was the case with Jim Henson's, is both of them went fairly early.
Yeah.
Varney was 50.
And
he was 50 at the time.
Yeah, he exactly 50.
Mhm.
Exactly 50 years old. And both were health related.
Yes.
In Jim Henson's case, he just waited to go to the doctor too late.
Yeah.
And in Jim Varney's case, I believe it was lung cancer, right?
It was.
From
Sadly, yes.
smoking for the majority of his life. And
Apparently,
I don't know about you,
chain smoker for much of his life.
I had a visceral reaction because one of these commercials
Yes.
was an anti-smoking commercial. And I
Yep.
was like, oh,
From
that's
something
sad.
like circa 1985. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I'm like, Jim, if you had only taken your own advice.
Mhm.
Oh, so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah. So that is kind of where we are coming in from
Mhm.
this. Obviously, grew up with Ernest,
Yep.
saw him all through our childhood. So
Yep.
let's kind of take a dive real quick on the man who brought Ernest to life, Jim Varney. He was actually, that was his name. A lot of people, when they, become actors, when they get any sort of career, will change their names. But I mean, his name was James. He went by Jim.
Yeah, went by Jim.
That's not a big deal. His name was James Albert Varney Jr., born June 15th, 1949 in Lexington, Kentucky. And he actually, apparently from a very early age exhibited, not only tendencies to perform, but apparently had exhibited a very strong memory. To the point where that was he would just memorize things from books and poems and just entertain family and friends with that. So much so that his mother basically, realizing that he had a knack for entertainment, enrolled him in or started him in children's theater when he was 8.
Yeah.
8 years old.
Yeah. Getting started early.
Yeah. Honestly, I wish my mother had done. I mean, I will say I was doing stuff that early, but not not in public. I did mine in church.
Yeah,
You don't get it noticed as much.
Yeah, my mom had us in doing little church theater stuff at the time too, which was fun. And then
Yeah.
but I didn't pursue theater after that. I didn't do it for years later. Yes.
Right. But you know,
the funny thing I saw there, by the way, about like when his mom decided to enroll him, is it mentioned that like he was basically like already being a mimic.
Yes.
Like imitating the characters he saw on TV, which you see play out in so much in the characters he develops later on.
Yeah, absolutely. He went on, you know, to continue his interest in theater as a teen, played Ebenezer Scrooge at the age of 15 in a local production, and by 17 was working in nightclubs and coffee houses, you know, just entertaining, doing stand-up, things like that. And he later studied Shakespeare at the Barter Theater in Abingdon, Virginia. And I've said for years, because when you think of the character of Ernest, you don't think of, you know, necessarily, that doesn't equate with education or, you know, a lot of training or anything like that. But Jim Varney was a Shakespeareanly trained actor.
Yes.
I mean, and you can tell just by listening to his voice, just in, I mean, there are definitely, when he goes real deep and talks like this. I mean, yes, that is an over dramatic version, but that is showing off a bit of his training. But just the way in which he speaks normally as Ernest, you can tell that his voice is trained. I mean, he's always had that deep, raspy voice. I mean, comes from smoking a little bit. Yeah, my voice is raspy today, not because of smoking, but from talking loudly to children. So there are other ways to get that. I'm just saying. But yeah, so you know, you can tell just in his normal everyday delivery. It's that very stead practice. You can tell this is a man
the
with
diction of it all.
Yes, he has extraordinary diction for a man who is playing a redneck. He comes off as extraordinarily educated.
Yes,
but not so much in a way that you don't believe Ernest.
Yeah,
he does it in a way that just makes Ernest a theatrical redneck.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really what it is. But yeah, he continued.
I wanted to add one little tidbit there, which was when I read that, you know, he had studied Shakespeare, and it referenced that he studied Shakespeare at the Barter Theater in Virginia, which didn't mean anything to me. I'm Virginia theater, but I looked up the Barter Theater, and it is apparently like it's no little local outfit. It is the apparently longest running professional equity theater.
It's a professional theater.
It is a professional, serious theater.
Well, I mean, he studied Shakespeare there.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't just say that he performed Shakespeare there.
No,
he studied
it.
Shakespeare.
Exactly.
Yes. And I mean, you actually sent me a clip of him. Now, yes, he actually put that together for an interview thing. So it's not, but it was, I will say, the voice worked. It was a very classical portrayal, what he was doing. He was doing a little bit of Hamlet, I believe, in what you sent me. And so, you know, not necessarily something that we might see in some of the more kind of out of the box versions of Shakespeare that you might see today. But a very classical version of Shakespeare.
And at the same time
performs the language very well.
Incredibly well. It's a great little Hamlet soliloquy there, and it's at the same time not the same kind of performance he puts on as any of his characters in the Ernest movies. It's a very much more stoic, serious.
I mean, you can recognize the voice. It is that studied deeper, but there's a little less humor to it.
There
It's a
is.
little bit more sincere.
Yes.
When
And
he's
if
when
anyone
he's
listening to
putting
this
it
wants
there.
to see what we're talking about, by the way, just go to YouTube, look up Jim Varney performing Shakespeare's Hamlet.
I'll put it in the
Put it
description.
in the
I'll
notes.
put the link
Yeah.
in the description.
Yeah, it's worth checking out.
Yeah. So definitely you know, like I said, he was also at the same time performing in an Opryland folk show. So you get the mix of Shakespeare and a folk show. We're kind of seeing the beginnings of Ernest, because Ernest was nothing if not theatrical, and then you've got the folkiness coming out, which is of course very much Ernest. And you know, let's see, worked at the Pioneer Playhouse in Danville, Kentucky. You know, basically performing in theater throughout you know, around Kentucky mostly still. But I mean, it's around this time then that we get into Ernest. Is there anything that you wanted to say about Jim Varney before we go into Ernest?
Not specifically, other than to make this note, since if we're going to jump straight into Ernest, which is that he did have some other TV work like through the 70s.
Right.
You know, I pulled up a clip earlier today. He was apparently a recurring character on Fernwood Tonight.
Right.
I think it was Martin Mull's show back in the day. And I pulled up one clip of he was again playing a character. I think his name was it's something Sims. I forget what it was, but he was again sort of a bit of a Southern hick who had been jumping motorcycles, and now he was going to be jumping Winnebagos.
Okay.
He'd be the first Winnebago, daredevil.
I will say, even before Ernest, you know, he's from Kentucky. He has a Southern accent.
Yes.
Regardless of his theatrical training, he still has that Southern accent. And so a lot of his earlier work were still just, in fact, even after, you know, the work that he would do outside of Ernest, after Ernest, or rather during Ernest, there really wasn't much of an after Ernest.
Yes, true.
Were all variations on a theme. He was basically always cast as the redneck, or you know, the Southern, because I mean that's who he was.
That's who he was. When he did an episode of The Simpsons and he was playing a carny, that's what he did. I just he did an episode of Hercules. He was still doing a Southern accent on Hercules.
Right. Right. Well, and you know, I would say probably his biggest film performance outside of honestly, probably his biggest film performance period, was as Jed Clampett in the Beverly Hillbillies movie.
Oh, if we're talking live action, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, obviously, you know, there was his voice work.
Yes.
But you know, as you know, Slinky Dog in Toy Story would probably be his biggest animated role. He did play Cookie in
Atlantis.
You know, in Atlantis, but that came out, you know,
after
post-mortem. Yeah. In fact, I believe it was his final film performance period. Like I think it was
you're right about
one that he recorded and the last one that was released.
I think you're right about that.
Yeah.
The only other thing I was going to note pre-Ernest particularly is we'll get into, you know, Ernest came about because of a series of commercials, and that wasn't the first time that Varney created characters for commercials. Or had a character for commercials.
Sure.
When I was reading up an article about the history of him, it even linked to one of the videos. He had played a character called Sergeant Glory, who was basically a military drill sergeant in a series of ads in Middle Tennessee back in the 70s.
Which he definitely played variations of in you know, some of the Ernest films as well.
He did, absolutely. But the one embedded video that was in this article of a Sergeant Glory ad, which was for a grocery store, he was almost unrecognizable as Jim Varney or what you see in Ernest. Like he was not playing I think the humor in the ad was supposed to come from how serious he was being, how
Sure.
serious he was treating this grocery store environment as a drill sergeant.
Right.
Because otherwise he was playing the character just like a drill sergeant, like he was Arlie Ermy.
Yeah.
And that was apparently a long running series of ads for a while, such that when Ernest premiered in 1980 as a commercial character,
Yeah.
it was mentioned in a news article that television viewers may remember Varney as having performed the character of Sergeant Glory in a series of ads.
Yeah.
But obviously that character ran its course, and
Yeah.
eventually he hit on Ernest P. Worrell.
Right. Well, I will say that Sergeant Glory was, like you said, it was a character that was created for commercials. But he actually did it for the exact same agency that he created Ernest for, which was the Cardin and Cherry advertising agency. And
they might have even had some of the same clients. I think I saw mention like he might have even still done like
I mean, I was about to say he did a lot of dairy work for at both as Ernest and Sergeant Glory. So yeah, I would not be surprised. I don't know if the grocery chain, the Pruitt's Food Town, I don't know if he did any of those as Ernest as well.
None of them showed up in great hits, at least, but
no,
he did a lot more than what showed up in greatest hits.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, so if we're getting now into the character of Ernest, so officially the character of Ernest P. Worrell, was created as an advertising tool for Cardin and Cherry. We are talking about what are their names?
It was John Cherry.
John Cherry the Third. Yeah, John Cherry the Third and Jerry Cardin.
Yes.
Although a lot of the things that I see, some people list them as the creators of Ernest. Some things say that they created Ernest in conjunction with Jim Varney. And there are even in the link that you shared with me, one of them, I'm assuming John Cherry, mentions that there is no Ernest without Jim.
Yeah.
I think that they might have had, the preliminary idea of, oh, he's just your everyman yokel down the street,
He's talking to his neighbor friend Vern. He might dress a certain way, but yeah, clearly, if you had cast another actor in the same role,
it would have been a completely different.
It would have been different. Varney is clearly bringing a lot to this.
Yes. Speaking of, do you remember? I think it was maybe like 5 years after Jim Varney died, they actually did a I don't think it was the same ad firm. Might have been. I'll have to look into this actually. But they did a basically find the new Ernest. It was like late 2000s, because actually at the time I was doing a local film for a friend. I thought it was going to be a student film, and it actually became a whole lot more. But I was doing basically, the guy had seen me do a Southern accent, and he, for some reason, thought that's all I could do. So basically cast me as a very earnest type character, but it was not earnest. It was very much like this, and I'd done variations on a character like this for a long time.
That sounds a lot more like Bayou, Louisiana.
I will say, there's a lot of different things in here, but I did a variation on it for a while called this isn't the name that he gave me, but his name was Cletus, spelled C-L-E Dus. All right. And they told me, they were like, you should try out to be the new Ernest. And I was like, that is a fool's errand. Because no one can be the new Ernest.
Nope.
That's just, and I was like, the best thing that you could do is something like what I was doing, a similar-ish character, but doing your very own thing. Do not even try to call it Ernest.
No.
And they showed me the guy that won, never seen him anywhere else, and they dressed him just like Ernest. And I was like, that poor man is gonna go nowhere.
I have it sitting here. I haven't actually watched it, but I found on YouTube there is a new Ernest demo reel, which apparently is from Card and Cherry, which appears to be this guy who they had, but like it from the screenshot of it, it's like he is not a ringer for Jim Varney, and I can't imagine that the performance is going to live up to it either.
Even if it is an exact replica, it would be a novelty for a very short amount of time, and then it would die. Because it's not the same. The best thing you can do is create your own character that is reminiscent of a character like any you know, I was about to say well-loved. Not everybody has the same affection for Ernest that I do, but any prominent character like that, you try to replace them. If you try to do a shot-for-shot copy, it's not going to last.
No.
The best, like I said, the best you can do is just your own version that is reminiscent. That's the only way you're even going to possibly be successful. But I was just like, that's such a bad idea.
Yes.
Such a bad idea.
You don't just have like an actor performing the role in the same way that like because thinking of recasting in it and the public not taking it well. For example, like Alden Ehrenreich taking over Han Solo. But he's still working with someone else's script. Like it's not his fault.
Right. I was like, that poor guy was not set up for success in any way, shape, or form. Number one, he was basically asked to, recreate this, well-loved character. At least, prominent character that everyone knows about. And, at the same time, the original vision was scrapped. And then basically they had to go in a whole new
reworked
direction.
on the fly. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, personally, I still think, before we get too off topic here, that the Han Solo is the kind of character you could recast. I think Indiana Jones is the kind of character it'd be much more difficult to. But at the same, but to get back to this, those are still characters that are being written by other people. And I think Varney was putting so much of himself. He was bringing his own comic to Ernest.
Yeah.
If you take Varney out of it, then you're going to have to find someone else to like match his comedic, wit. And you're just not going to.
Yeah. And the thing is that, he was so multi-talented in a plethora of that, to me, is what made the Ernest character pop. Is that he was willing to do and try so many things. And, we watched the greatest hits, basically the collections of the at least most popular commercials. Now I don't know if any of them are from like the earliest incarnation of Ernest, because he's first started appearing in, I believe, 1980.
Yes.
And was the first films. I mean, Ernest Family Album came out in 83, but I think he was still doing commercial work alongside of that. I don't think
doing commercial work, I think at least up until 87, according to a New York Times article.
Yeah, I think it wasn't until really Ernest Goes to Camp, which was, I believe, 87.
It was the Times article I found was kind of put out in relation to the film, and it mentioned that over the course of the previous 7 years, he had done over 2,600 Ernest ads. Yeah, but like I was saying, I he was still doing that, so I don't know
where all of those ads were coming from, if they were all from his later work or if some of them. But I will say, in those ads, we talked about it before we started recording. The character is fully formed.
Oh yes.
In fact, you will find gags from a lot of these commercials in a lot of the films later on.
I noticed gags from a Family Album that showed up in ads.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Family Album, they basically just reused all of the sets that they used for a lot of the. I mean,
to be true, yeah, one of those sets exactly shows up. Yeah, at
well,
least
I mean, to be fair, the majority of those commercials were actually filmed at John Cherry's house.
That's true.
So, you know, I will say it's not until the films, when they had some sort of budget, that they stopped recording primarily at John Cherry's house. So yeah. But yeah, I mean, he a lot of these things, you know, I will say I was surprised how little the comes up until it's not in the volume 1 at all. It actually doesn't appear until volume 2.
I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah. I will say though, there are you know, there are those other running gags, and there are also little hints at other characters, because of his extensive theatrical work. You know, obviously he's mostly playing Ernest, but Jim was never satisfied in just playing one character. Even within Ernest, and we have kind of talked about this, Ernest himself breaks into other characters while still being Ernest. You know, Jim Varney definitely does the thing in the films where, you know, he's playing Ernest and then he'll suddenly dress up as another character and he's playing another character. It's hard to tell if Ernest is dressing up or if those other characters are. I mean, in some it's pretty obvious, but yeah, there's that kind of, you know, dual identity thing going on a little bit, obviously to comedic effect. Not in any way trying to, you know, claim that he has multiple personality disorder or anything like that.
No. But Scared Stupid gets weird at one point when it's like it's implied that like all these characters are there simultaneously.
Yeah. And the kids interact with him as those characters, which is weird. Yeah, we'll talk about that
later. Yeah, exactly.
Episodes from now. But yeah, he even in his earliest commercial work is, you know, jumping into other characters. He's using other voices. He's, you know, there's at least one where he has a conversation with himself, you know. And I mean, I will say I really enjoyed it, because in the ad, he's like, "Hey, Ernest," he's like, "Who?" As he's playing himself. I'm like, you're making yourself look like an idiot? Okay. Yeah, I mean, you know, Ernest is I will say one thing that is obvious about the character of Ernest is he is confident in himself. He is assured in himself, which is, I have always felt a very refreshing from a person who myself is an introvert and has had, you know, difficulty feeling comfortable in my own skin. Having, you know, a character like Ernest, who is, you know, kind of a lovable idiot, be, you know, so confident in himself, was kind of a positive influence for me.
Yeah. Nice. It doesn't really speak to what you're saying about how fully formed the character was early on. This doesn't exactly speak to his characterization, but I found an article from the Tennessean newspaper from August of 1980.
Sure.
When the first Ernest ads started coming out. I mentioned, this is the one I mentioned earlier that referred to, you know, viewers may be familiar with Sergeant Glory.
Yeah.
But Cherry had developed, like you said, Ernest for an ad campaign for a local amusement park in Kentucky.
Right.
It was a Beach Bend park.
Yes.
And according to the article, they wanted to do something different rather than like show the exhibits, showed like the Dallas cheerleaders were coming. They thought just having the character of Ernest talk about all these things
Yeah.
would be funny. And so one of the things that was there from the very first ads was Vern. That he was
Yes.
talking to the
Right.
off-camera Vern. Apparently he was called Vernon more properly in the early.
Which he does occasionally
He
refer
does
to him
occasionally.
as Vernon, even in the commercials. I will say Vern is a thing that they don't include in most of the films. In fact, the
Mhm.
only one I know for sure that they do it in is Saves Christmas.
Yeah. To be fair, it
uh,
does play differently when you're doing a narrative film like that. That is an odd
yeah,
statement.
yeah,
But yeah, Vern was there from the very first ads.
yeah.
Part of what was unique to the character, and talking to the screen through the character of Vern.
Well,
Um,
and one of the things that I found different or interesting in the clip that you sent me is they show basically behind the scenes stuff of him doing some of the commercials. And I mean, they talk about having a wide angle lens, but when you watch him talking to the camera as Vern in a lot of those ads, he is this far from the camera. Like literally, it is like in his face. Like it is right in his face. He is talking. There is, I was assuming it'd be like back here or something. No, it is like, maybe 3 feet away from his face. Like it is not very far at all. He's having these, intimate conversations with the audience, with Vern, with the camera. Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. Something else this article mentions that I referenced earlier, and I said I'd come back to,
Yeah.
which is that whoever is writing the article is speaking to John Cherry, and he says that if people want to see more commercials with Ernest, that'll if he's in demand, that'll open doors for us. And they go on to say what some of those doors would be. And one of which is that early on, they apparently had the idea that we would eventually see Vern. And that they described Vern, they describe what Vern was going to be like. Vern would be a tea sipper, one who thinks himself above people, according to Cherry, much like Winchester on MASH. Or like a later article referred to him, kind of like Fraser Crane. So
Okay, I can see that. I mean, I hope you don't take offense with me drawing parallels to to Vern with you.
I am not offended by being compared to Fraser Crane, if that's what you're saying.
Yeah, there you go.
That is perfectly fine. But also amusingly, it then goes on to say, also part of the cast will be Edna, Ernest's wife.
I was about to say they make quick allusions, especially in the family album, and I think there was at least one commercial in the greatest hits that mentioned Edna. But obviously the character of Edna is dropped before they ever go into feature films.
Yes.
In fact, in most of them that we do see his home life, he lives alone.
Yes.
I mean, in at least one, he has a love interest. I can't remember,
that's right.
and I think he's at least sweet on a couple of women here and there. But yeah.
There was also a plan at some point. There was a proposed Ernest movie that never got made called like Ernest Goes to Paradise, which would have him with a love interest. Although it was described differently a couple of different places I saw it. It was usually described as like a love interest who like has the sweets for him, but he doesn't really care for, or something, or vice versa.
Which doesn't sound right for Ernest at all to me, honestly.
And maybe that's what they have realized is that didn't work.
I will say I do think that there are early commercials, and even one of the things that were in that clip that you sent, it was basically a segment on the NBC Nightly News. The anchor at the time was Tom Brokaw, and number one, he called him Ernie, which I'm like, you don't know this character at all, do you? Do you, Tom? But Tom Brokaw called him a couple of times, called him Ernest the Jerk. And I was like, that's a weird way to describe Ernest. But I will say there are one or two commercials where, because the Ernest that I know from the films the Ernest that I remember is that kind of lovable loser. He's the guy that's always on your side. He is that perennial underdog, but he's also the guy that will never kick you when you're down, that will always be, the guy in your corner when no one else is. He's got his faults.
Yeah.
He's maybe not the brightest tool, but he has always struck me as loyal to a fault.
Yeah.
But there are commercials where he's practically taunting Vern.
Oh, yes.
And
No,
so
that almost is a defining aspect of his relationship with Vern, is he's just kind of there to harass him.
I mean, I will say in a lot of them, it seems like, as you said, that Vern is the one that feels like he's above Ernest.
Mhm.
And that Ernest is just, his friend, his buddy, that's just like, hey, Vern, see this thing I saw, he's just an exuberant guy that doesn't get that his friend doesn't like him, part of that kind of lovable loser thing, like I said. But there are, like I said, a couple of commercials, and even and I think there was even a little bit that Varney described him as kind of unlikable at first, but then you learn to love him, kind of thing. And I'm like, I don't get, and I feel I'm like, maybe that was like an earlier interpretation of the character, and then as things went on, they decided to drop that. But I definitely think that he's more success. I mean, definitely by Ernest Goes to Camp.
Oh, but by the
that
movie.
is not, he is not the taunting, kind of rude character. He is fully in lovable loser mode, to the point where you're like, I don't see how this guy has a job.
Yeah.
To that point, almost, like I said, almost to a fault. So like I said, I was just kind of surprised to see him playing that aspect of Ernest, like, ever, because it just never felt like part of the character to me. And so you describing him having a love interest that he's not into, that doesn't sound like Ernest to me.
Yeah.
The other way around, I would get.
And I saw a mention that was a plot idea at one point too, which again makes more sense than the vice versa scenario.
Because the other one seems a little kind of cold for Ernest.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Again, it never got made. Clearly, someone realized it at some point.
Oh yeah. I mean, at some point there were a ton of ideas that they had that they never made. In fact, apparently they were in early production on one that was supposed to come out the year Varney died. That just never ended up, actually being made, unfortunately. I mean,
I'm sure we can touch on some of the
depending on your track record with some of the later Ernest films, maybe, unfortunately, maybe, obviously not the way that it happened, but
I have to look back up what the made up Ernest movies that get name checked in The Simpsons are.
Sure. All right. So we've talked a little bit about about Jim Varney, the creation of Ernest, and how he was pretty much fully formed out of the gate. And we've kind of touched here and there on some of the commercials, and because there's Greatest Hits Volume 1, which I think was originally released as Ernest Film Festival. Is that what it's?
Yes, I think that's right.
Okay. And Greatest Hits Volume 2, which was released originally some sort of like sweepstakes thing.
Yeah, it was a collection of commercials combined with a sweepstakes.
Right. That they eventually cut the sweepstakes out and re-released it as Greatest Hits Part 2, which is basically just a compilation of, his more infamous commercials. And I will say, like I said, the character is fully formed, and I completely understand how this character spawned films. Again, how successful the films are your own interpretation. But you know, he is already a pretty diverse, rich character. And I mean, obviously a lot of these are local commercials, but you know, he did have a couple of national commercials. What strikes me about Ernest, and I think that there were a couple of lesser known characters that did this as well, but Ernest was one of these characters that transcended, you know, because you might have a local commercial that has their own spokesman that is their character,
The Wolfman and Donna,
right?
which is going to mean nothing to anyone outside the Atlanta area. But
yeah, exactly. Or you know, the guy that owns the mobile home lot in where I grew up. I thought that man was famous. Saw him at a restaurant one day, and my dad was like, "I know him," and I was like, "You know him?" He's like, "Yeah, he's not a big deal." And I was like, "Really? He's on TV?" It's like, yeah, he paid for those commercials. That's how he's on TV. But I don't think, like I said, I do think that there were some, but obviously most of them were a little lesser known than Ernest, that transcended not just transcended products, because Ernest like I said, in a lot of local markets was doing car commercials. He was doing gas commercials. He was doing
a lot of dairy commercials,
lots of dairy,
bank commercials, a whole bunch of news commercials show for different news stations in the greatest hits.
Well, and he also like I said, I mentioned national commercials. He was the lead spokesman for Mellow Yellow, and also did some Sprite ads.
So those Sprite ads are some of my favorite ones in the greatest hits, to be honest.
Yeah, honestly, I had forgotten about Lyman. I was like, oh yeah, that was a thing.
I hadn't forgotten about that, but it was interesting to hear it in the ads. It's been so long since I've heard a Sprite ad actually refer to Lyman.
Right. Honestly, one of my favorite ones of those is when he goes into Vern's wine cellar, and he's basically like, "You got a bunch of old stuff in here, Vern," and just starts like throwing it around. He's like, "You need to get you some Sprite. It's got the unique taste of Lyman. Let it breathe." Yeah, it's like, all right, that's enough. Yeah, it's like because there is the funniness of he's throwing out probably priceless bottles of wine, and replacing it with Sprite. That's funny.
It's funny. That's probably where Tom Brokaw sees Ernest the jerk, to be honest.
Yeah, he's throwing out this wine. Yeah. And he would do careless things like that, but it was never malicious.
Mean-spirited.
Yeah, exactly. I never saw Ernest as mean-spirited, and there definitely were some commercials in here. There is one in particular. We're going to kind of jump around in the greatest hits because there's no narrative structure, so there's really no need to hit them one at a time.
They're not chronological. They're not ordered by brand or anything.
No, but there is one in particular that, like I said, the main thing that I got from it is that it was just mean, because basically he pulls up to a drive-through, and I get from context clues, not from actual words that are spoken, that it is a McDonald's drive-through. And then apparently Vern's working at McDonald's now. And he's, basically Ernest is making fun of Vern for working at a McDonald's. He gives him his food and he drives away. And I was like, what the fuck was this commercial for? Because I'm like, if it was for McDonald's, it was the worst McDonald's ad I have ever seen, because they're basically making fun of people that work at McDonald's.
And somehow I missed this one. I watched both specials, and this one didn't register with me.
Yeah, I was.
Go back and look.
I have no clue what. Like I said, the only thing I can imagine is that it was for McDonald's, because he does hand him a McDonald's bag. You can see the McDonald's M's, but the whole time he's like, making fun of Vern for working at McDonald's and laughing at him. And I mean, he does say, let me get one of those billion served, doing those kind of like catchphrases.
It sounds like a McDonald's ad. Yeah.
It doesn't sound like a good
No,
McDonald's
not
ad.
a good one. No.
And I'm
No,
like,
I was thinking at first, it's like, especially in his Sprite, and especially the Mellow Yellow ads, they show a lot of Mountain Dew in them, so they don't have a problem showing competitive products.
Right.
But no,
I will say,
McDonald's
seeing those old school cans was a trip.
Yeah. They're the old school cans. I noticed, I was paying attention to this. They're not quite old school enough where the pull tab still came off, I don't think.
No. I mean, it's early 80s. It's still still the pop.
Yeah.
But
It's
I was just, that commercial mystified me. And I'm like, why is this in the greatest hits? Because it makes no sense. It's not indicative of the character we know of as Ernest.
Yeah.
And who the fuck knows what it's advertising?
Yeah.
Because if it is advertising McDonald's, I would not have run that ad for very long.
Yeah.
I will say I didn't see any other ads from McDonald's.
I
don't see McDonald's listed as a national ad campaign that he did.
I was gonna say, I literally kept notes on the entire first volume of Greatest Hits as to what the ads were for, and there were no McDonald's ads.
I mean, that was in the second.
It was in the second.
It was specifically in the second one.
Yeah. But I don't remember any other McDonald's ads. To be fair, there were a couple of other ones where, like, when I was trying to write them down, like, I think that was an ad for like a gas company. I'm not 100%.
I mean, I will say in most others, he at least mentions the name of the company.
Yeah.
But in this one, no mention. I was like, oh, maybe it's an ad for a car, because he's in a car, but they didn't mention the name of the car place that he was that he bought his car from or anything like that. I really am mystified as to what that commercial was about. It made no sense to me.
One of these from volume 1, I literally put a question mark next to it because it was it was a funny ad. It involved him. He has a chocolate Easter bunny, and he says he always likes to eat eyes first. And he just takes a chunk out of the face of this chocolate Easter bunny.
Yeah, I like to eat the eyes first.
The eyes first.
It's freaky looking. It's just a hole where its face was.
It's a funny ad, and I have no clue what it's an ad for. Like, I think it's advertising the holiday of Easter.
I think because some of those ads were like for local things where they were like, so and so's coming into town for Easter, or so I think that might have just been one of those generalized ads that would have run for something like that.
It might have been. There were a couple of ads that were basically just like Christmas ads, almost.
Yeah. I mean, there were a couple of those that were tied to like gas companies or or local people, local companies, something like that. But there were definitely a few. So I've got a couple of notes on the ones that made me laugh. So the first one, and I will say it made me a little sad watching the Mellow Yellow ads, because Mellow Yellow is one of those brands that's kind of forgotten. Like, you don't see Mellow Yellow in a lot of places anymore.
You don't see it advertised. It's in your Coke Freestyle machines. You can get it there.
Yeah, I was about to. It still exists.
Yeah, it's still there. I've had it recently.
It's more just part of the Coca-Cola company than being advertised as like its own. And I mean, it's always been part of the Coca-Cola company.
It's like Fresca. It exists as a thing in the store and in the machine.
Right, but in these ads, he is pushing hard for make the Mellow Yellow move. That kind of thing. And I will say though, in all of these ads, Vern, the one who is painted as the more sophisticated one, is always drinking Mountain Dew, and Ernest, the more kind of fly by the seat of your pants, kind of lovable idiot is the one pushing Mellow Yellow.
Mm.
I almost feel like these commercials are working against themselves a little bit because it's in every ad. It's, you need to stop drinking that Mountain Dew. It's like, at what point are we just going to admit that apparently Vern just likes Mountain Dew better?
Mountain Dew,
And what does that say about Mellow Yellow? But I will say I did like the taste test ad that they did, because that one actually made sense, because it looked like Vern was not only messing with Ernest, but also pushing Mellow Yellow, because Ernest has the blindfold, and he's got Mellow Yellow and Mountain Dew, and he's like, I can tell the difference. I know exactly what he even was like, I was studying all night long. I know exactly how to do this. And he goes to drink the Mellow Yellow, and as he's drinking the Mellow Yellow, Vern takes the Mountain Dew and replaces it with another Mellow Yellow. And of course, then Ernest is like, I don't know, I can't decide. And of course, he takes the blindfold off and doesn't notice that they're both Mellow Yellow, and it's just like, I guess I'm gonna,
They seem to make it. I'm gonna assume this was intentional. He never really makes eye contact with the cans again. He just sort of like stares off to the left, like talking about like he's gonna have to retake, 8th grade or whatever he said.
Well, I think he's like, looks like I'm gonna have to clean the chalkboard again.
That's it.
And which I'm just like, that's a random punishment for an adult. All right. But yeah, I will say the first one that made me flat out just laugh. And there weren't a lot that made me like bust out, but there were a couple of like random ones that I was like, okay, that it's not that great, but something about the way it was done was just so funny. It was, I can't even remember it specifically, but it was an ad for sour cream. And he was like, and I've written a poem about this sour cream.
Oh, yes.
Roses are red, violets are blue, sour cream is white, and comes in a jar. Or something like that. And it was just so off the scheme of what you'd expect that it like completely killed me. It was just really
it's a sort
funny.
of unjoke you didn't get a lot in
exactly. It was very much an unjoke, which caught me off guard, and I just thought it was really funny. Another thing, I mean, this commercial didn't necessarily make me laugh, but I was just like, wow, we're really advertising how hick this local community is, because he wasn't just working for, I mean, there were some that you could tell were in Tennessee, which is where John Cherry was Nashville area. That's where the majority of the Ernest films are shot, or in and around Nashville. Because John Cherry was the director of most of them.
There were cable ads for Florida.
I was going to say there were some for Florida. There were some for I think there was one specifically for Atlanta that I noticed.
There were at least 2 ads for Atlanta. They were Atlanta Toyota had an ad.
Right.
I tried to screenshot it, and YouTube would not let me do that. And there was at least one ad for 94Q. Which is now Star 94. It's 94.1.
Oh, okay. I would have heard that and not recognized it because I don't know the radio stations. Definitely not the old radio stations.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so this, number one, the ad agency had reach, but so did Ernest.
Yes.
Even in his local commercials, not just his national stuff. But there was an ad where I guess they were advertising like some big like outdoor like water thing that they were doing somewhere, and he was like, and don't forget to check out your life jugs. And I'm like, life jugs, which were basically milk cartons that are strung together on a string, and he's like, if somebody's having a hard time, you just pick them up and you throw it to them and you save a life. And I'm just like, wow, we are really advertising how cheap and redneck we are right now. Your life jugs.
I think that was the first one of the PSAs I came across, because it threw me at first. It's like, what is this an ad for? Then I realized, like, oh, it's a public service announcement.
That's and there definitely were a few of those here and there. Oh, I have a note. There's one that he does for a potato chip company, and he's like, Mr. Staleness wants to get in the potato chips, and he's like, a peel and seal strip. I was like,
I like that.
Why did that not catch on?
I know. I think
this is in the 80s.
Like, that's a great idea. Why do we not have that?
Well, there are, like, my cereal now comes with a Ziploc top.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, if you get a bag.
Yes.
And I'm like, this was in the 80s. Why was this not on everything? I do wonder if maybe it wasn't super effective.
Maybe.
But I'm just like,
if you see it multiple times, it starts to lose the adhesive factor, I guess.
Sure. That's possible. I mean, but I've had similar things on products now. Like, that feels more common now. I'm like, they were doing this in the early to mid 80s. How was this not a thing, a bigger thing?
That was Guy's potato chips. I wrote that down.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I will say, okay, when I was a kid, I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, the whole yellow milk jug becoming a thing.
Yeah.
There are Ernest commercials about it.
Specifically about it.
Like, and I'm like, wait a second. Because I remember them making a big deal about it in the early 90s. At least 5 to 8 years after Ernest has already been talking about it. Why is this still a new thing that we think is an incredible invention? Ernest already told me about it years ago.
Yeah. Okay. Just speaking of milk, I had to look up what is acidophilus milk.
Yeah, the sweet acidophilus, because at first I thought I just thought it was another milk company, and then I realized that it was the same company, the Purity, right?
It was still pure. I think it was still
Purity milk. Yeah.
But yeah, it's a sweet acidophilus milk. It's a kind of milk, apparently. It's more tangy. Whatever it is that is part of the milk. Yeah.
Okay. So like kind of like in the line of like a buttermilk type thing, or is it more of like the cream?
I'm trying to look this up real quick.
Yeah.
What was it called? What is acidophilus milk? It is regular milk enriched with acidophilus, which is a strain of healthy bacteria.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, it's the same kind of bacteria that goes in like yogurt and other fermented.
Okay. Because I will say, the first ad that I remember him talking about it, he's taking a bath in it. So I was like, is that specifically what it's for?
Yeah, no, it's not for that. Yeah, I remember that ad too. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But no, it does say here that supplementing your diet with acidophilus milk could have therapeutic benefits. So I'm just, this is off livestrong.com. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, I can't say I've ever heard the term before seeing the Ernest ad. I'm pretty confident I've never seen it on a store shelf.
No.
And the fact that it's being advertised on television.
Yeah. Because there were at least 2 ads for it.
There were at least 2 ads for it. Yeah. And ads for buttermilk and obviously other kinds of multiple dairy products.
Yeah, I will say he did a lot for the Purity. Purity milk, a lot of their different dairy products.
I was fascinated. It was an early ad. Which one was it? Thought I made a note of this. It was when he did the ad for a Scoutorama at the Tennessee State Fairgrounds. He was wearing a Scout stash. I happen to notice he was also wearing an Eagle Scout badge.
Honestly, I was like, huh. It's been a long time since I've seen an ad for the Boy Scouts.
Yeah, and to be fair, that was an ad for like a Scout, a Scout camp event. Later on, he just had a straight on, like you said, a straight just ad for the Boy Scouts.
Because he was doing the Boy Scout.
But in that Scoutorama ad, there was a print on the screen at the bottom that said "Ernest, courtesy of Purity."
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
I didn't
there were a
get
few
better
that
at.
listed him as, being lent to them basically for specific things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was one for I think it might have been natural gas or something like that, where he was clearly wearing the purity badge on his vest.
I will say that one of the reasons that they decided to go into films was because there was such a clamor for Ernest. Apparently, a lot of other national companies wanted him to advertise for them, but he couldn't because of agreements he had made with local companies.
I happened across an interview on Good Morning America from about like 1985 or so, and that's one of the things that came up in that interview, where he was asked about doing national ads, and he says we have all kinds of local contracts and whatnot. We're in those markets. Oh, and actually, I have a stat on that that showed up in an article. You talked about when we were talking about him doing ads in Florida and Tennessee and Georgia.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there was reference made in there to Virginia. I know we did ads in Kentucky. The very first theme park ads, the amusement park ads were in Kentucky. It mentioned in this 1987 New York Times article, he had done 2,600 ads in 7 years across 140 markets. So
no wonder he took off.
Yeah,
I mean, because we have the most recent thing I can think of an ad getting their own type of spin-off was they tried that short-lived sitcom with the Geico cavemen. Yeah, but number one, they were just the Geico ads.
Yeah, exactly.
And honestly, they did a string and then they were off for a little while, and then I think they came back a little bit after the failed show. But Ernest was everywhere, advertising everything. So I'm not surprised that he spawned a film franchise.
Oh, absolutely not.
I mean, it didn't hurt that the guy who basically owned it was also the one making the movies.
True.
On a shoestring budget, basically.
The thing that's kind of surprising there is that they were successful at all, because usually when you have things like the Geico caveman and you try to spend advertising characters into like actual fictional works, they don't tend to work.
I will say, I think that again goes to the strength of Jim Varney, because those characters are so one note, and because number one, you get, yes, they were seen by a lot of people, but the combination of 10 ads, there's not a lot of meat there.
No.
Whereas Ernest had done 2,600.
Yes,
there's a lot of meat on that bone. Plus,
there's
Jim Varney himself as a performer that just brings so much to the character as well. But getting back, I will say, I don't want this to be too much longer because it is the first episode, and I want to enthuse people. But I do want to talk just real quickly about a few more of the ads before we talk briefly about the family album.
Sure. Okay, can I make one point about the character and how it developed in movies and whatnot? And that's simply that something else that I think distinguishes Ernest is that he's not tethered to one brand. Like I can't even think of another spokesman who just wasn't a spokesman for a particular company.
Definitely not anymore.
No, definitely not anymore. Like, I feel like maybe the Micro Machine Man did this back in the day, maybe, but I didn't actually double check that. But before he was the Micro Machine Man, I mean, I feel like he did something before that. But no, Ernest was doing, as the Greatest Hits illustrates, just all kinds of ads. So one, you don't see that anymore, and two, I think when they then wanted to turn him into, to put him on film, it doesn't feel as craven. Exactly. But if you do a caveman TV show, it feels like Geico's trying to create a Geico TV show.
It feels like a money grab. But with Ernest, it's like there's already so much there. We just want to see more.
Yeah. You don't
Yeah.
feel like it's an advertisement for Purity or for Florida Cable.
No, it doesn't feel like it's
Toyota.
tied to one company because
It's
he
tied
advertised for everybody, basically.
exactly. It just feels like this is an Ernest movie. It has nothing to do with who he was, doing commercials for.
And you got to know that the companies that had kind of made him their spokesman loved the fact that they were making movies, because that those people in those markets, every time they saw those movies, they would be immediately tied to, oh, Purity ice cream. Oh, the blah 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 gas company. They were just indelibly in those markets.
Yeah.
He was tied. But yeah, real quick, a couple of some of
You wanted to
the
get a few more.
ads.
That's right.
Yeah, just a couple more. There was a joke that I just thought was clever. It was some kind of like sporting competition they were doing, and he was like, "I will be competing in fencing," and then he goes over with a fencer's mask on, goes over and starts painting a fence, and I was like, "That's just clever. That's just clever." There was let's see. Oh, I mean, occasionally there were ones that again, I didn't feel matched the Ernest aesthetic. There was one in particular that was real body shaming of I believe I think Vern was getting married, and Vern was like basically smack talking the person getting married. It was like, and it was real like, oh, she's ugly and she's fat, and I'm just like, geez, that's not what I want from Ernest.
No.
But and this just goes back to, like I said, Ernest being tied to these companies. There was one that showed that there were literal car companies, there were car lots that were just placing his face on cars to advertise that they were marked down. Yeah, that's crazy. I will say probably one of my favorite ones was I can't remember exactly what the ad was about, but Ernest basically he was trying to get Vern to do this other thing, but Vern was basically with the competing company or whatever, but it was like something heavy that that was like breakable, and Ernest is like, don't worry, Vern, I'm not gonna break it, it's gonna be fine. And he goes through the whole ad, and at the end he drops it and it breaks. You hear it break, and he looks down and he looks up and he goes, look what mean old Mr. Gravity did. Yes. And I was just like, okay, that one is one of those kind of taunting commercials a little bit, but the way that he sold it, I was just, okay, yeah, no, you got me. Look what mean old Mr. Gravity did. Just something about that. I will say though, there was one later in the volume 2 where he did like a rap, and I just wrote, Ernest should not rap. No. That was possibly the most definitively 80s ad of the entire lot. It was not good. Were there any other particular ads that you wanted to talk about? I'll touch on a couple of them. One, in terms of like ones that seemed a little off brand, there was one for gas appliance dealers that we went on this really weird like Christmas Carol inspired like ghost thing at the beginning, and then changed tones midway through the ad to be Ernest just talking about like reindeer on Bird's roof. Like it had two entirely different tones. Sure. And the first tone didn't feel like an Ernest ad. Yeah. Being a Boy Scout, I was amused by the Boy Scout ads. Sure. Those were a lot of fun. I mentioned earlier, I liked the Sprite ads. I assume Coke had a little more, polished maybe in writing them. Who knows? Yeah, I mean, because Coke owned both Sprite and Mellow Yellow. Yeah. I mean, I imagine that they had some, but at the same time, these are national ads. Exactly. They are specifically using this company because they want Ernest. Yes, exactly. So I'm sure that they had particular copy. I'm sure that Lyman was. That I'm certain was. Yeah. I'm sure they also let them make it an Ernest ad. Oh, absolutely.
No. I mean, part of what stood out to me with the two of the Sprite ads in particular was they used it was a lot of good physical comedy from Varney. And to be fair, like the Fire Ant ad, I think he used the same Fire Ant shtick in some other.
I believe Ernest Goes to Camp. I believe he does the Fire Ant shtick. Yeah.
But no. I when I was watching something else, like the Good Morning America segment, it showed a clip of another ad he did with the Fire Ant shtick. It wasn't Sprite. But he was a good physical comedian.
I was about to say, I think they reused. I think you can tell we see similar gags a lot, even in the greatest hits. So I think they reused a lot of those. But again, they're local. So you do it in Florida, you can also do it in Georgia.
Oh, I read that specifically somewhere, that they would literally just copy ads if they were running in different markets, and no one cared. If they're dairy products that only sell exclusively in Arkansas versus South Carolina, no one is bothered by it.
Yeah.
He the first time he made reference to one of his like banking ads, and he used the word entrepreneur. I thought it was funny.
He used that a lot.
Yeah, that became a running joke. To be fair. Let's see. One ad that I and maybe this will be the last one I mentioned, but I mean, actually, to go back to the physical comedy bit.
Yeah.
Multiple ads where he fell off the ladder. I'm just impressed by. I assume there's a bag or something there that he's landing on. Regardless, just the willingness to do that.
Right. I mean,
is a commitment.
In the link that you showed me, they actually showed him doing one of these ads, and literally, it's like a 3-foot drop. Okay. It's not much. It's a low roof that he's putting the ladder up to. I will say he does that joke again in Ernest Goes to Camp, and he actually rides the ladder.
Yeah.
So they had a crash pad.
Yes. Yeah.
But in all the other ones, you see him jump off.
You do see him jump. You just don't see him land. So it's
right. Well, yeah. I mean, it's far enough off the ground that you're not going to see him land, but it's literally it's 3 feet between his feet and the ground. It's not much.
Similarly, it's not quite a physical comedy bit, but there was an ad for, was it Shop a Minute, which had him on like a spinning playground, wheel, and I guess the camera mounted on the wheel, and I thought that one was fun. And
I will say though, that was a big merry-go-round.
It was,
because when he fell off, we only saw him on the ground pass once.
Yeah.
After that, I'm like, this is a big, because I kept waiting to see him on the ground like multiple times as we passed by, and no, you only saw him. I'm like, how big is this merry-go-round?
It was an adult-sized wheel there.
Yeah.
Finally, in terms of specific ads, there was a First Federal Savings ad where he was. It started off with him. He's going to drink water and use a puppet, but then the voice that comes over is Jim Varney doing a Rod Serling voice. And it was a pretty good Rod Serling, and I was just amused by that.
Yeah.
Frankly, in a bigger picture sense, and I wanted to make sure I said this before we moved on from the commercials.
Yeah.
Watching all the Ernest commercials, one thing that hit me midway through Greatest Hits is that if Jim Varney was alive today, or if it had come along earlier, Jim Varney would be killing it on TikTok.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Because this is basically the format he's using in all these ads, is just like tons, just hundreds and hundreds of little bits, 30-second bits.
Quick bits.
Yeah.
Quick jokes. Yeah. Yes. And he's the master of them, coupled with his, like you said, physical humor and just his own facials.
Yes.
Because half the time his facials are what sell it.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's some great stuff. I will say I had a couple of last quick notes. Number one, these, if you want to be watching these, I meant to mention this before, but they are available on a few different streaming services, a lot of free ones. If you have a Roku, I watched them on Roku. They're also available on Tubi and some other things. The thing with all of those things, most free services will also have ads. What is really funny is, and I wrote down, it's weird having an ad break when all you're watching is ads.
Yes.
Because you're like, Where's Ernest? Oh, this is a different commercial,
Yes.
not an Ernest commercial.
Yes.
I'm like, it's weird to be to have ads broken up by ads.
By other ads, yeah. It's like when you have to watch an ad before a movie trailer. It's like, I came here to watch an ad. I don't want to watch an ad before my ad. Yeah.
Yeah. And I will briefly mention that they do, in both compilations, do bloopers.
Yes.
Now in the volume 1, all of the bloopers are at the end. But in volume 2, you can tell that they basically put together a few different collections, because at least 3, because the bloopers run 3 times in the middle of it, and then there's also one at the end. One thing I will say that's interesting about at least the ones in the second one is, in the second one, there's at least 2 that are less bloopers and more behind the scenes, because they show you how they did the pancake gag, which, I mean, it's super simple. It's basically just a guy on a ladder catching the pancakes as Ernest tosses them up, and then basically at a certain point dropping them back down. So but at the same time, it's like, when you see it, it's like, oh, of course. But that's still not super easy, because as someone who is not great at catching myself, I can imagine there were quite a few, oh crap, I missed the pancake,
And there's several of those in the outtakes of when the pancakes are missed, when they're trying to drop them back and they miss the plate, or they miss his hat,
or they bounce off his head, or something like that. And then but yeah, I thought those in particular were interesting, just kind of seeing how they did some of the gags. But yeah, I do quickly want to touch on the family album, because this was the first, it wasn't theatrical, but this was the first kind of film special thing that he did outside of just doing the commercials. And it's basically, I mean, like I said, all the framing devices are all still around John Cherry's house. So it's all the setups that you are familiar with in the commercials. So they're tying it into that. But then they are basically doing these long form sketches, all that are basically all just, Jim Varney wanting to explore characters.
Yeah, just play someone else goofy.
Right. And I will say, in all of these things, in a couple of the commercials, there are like occasionally they'll bring on like a news anchor or somebody that they're advertising or something like that. But for the most part, all of this stuff is just all Ernest. And that is, do we see another person in the family album?
Oh yes.
There's at least in one of the things,
in the card playing
family
specifically
members. That's right. Yeah. But there is, in particular, the first scene.
Oh yeah, the first one is.
And honestly, I think that was probably my favorite scene from this.
I think
because it was also, in my opinion, the least problematic. Although there's a big problematic element in it.
Yeah.
But basically he plays, a knockoff of Davy Crockett, and he runs into an old fort being chased. I will say I was impressed that he specifically kept calling them Native Americans, and not, I mean, of course, then right afterwards he was like, I can't believe my ancestor got away from them Indians. And I'm just like, okay. I mean, at least he didn't call them Injuns, which is what I was afraid of.
Yeah.
Apologies. I don't like using that type of phrase, but that's what I was expecting. But in that sketch, he just kept calling them Native Americans. And I will say, we never see them. No. So we don't, I mean, we do see his eye through a hole. He obviously has on a little bit of war paint around his eye, or their idea of war paint, and some very bad stereotyped voices.
Yeah.
But we at least don't see him, in, red face or,
No.
in the
And it's also all part of the shtick of that bit is that Jim Varney is playing everyone. And it
right.
feels
Oh, yes.
like someone in the process realized like Jim Varney should like wear makeup, and play someone in like full face. So we're going to like literally just show his eyeball.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, in that he just plays a whole bunch. Well, and in that the guy is alone in the fort.
Yeah.
So he starts pretending that there's a bunch of people, and basically just making but at a certain point, we lose him running around to these things, and we just see these people in various places, and he's just playing them all, so much so that by the end we're not sure if there's more than one of him there anymore or if it is still just him.
He's just doing full-on Gollum stuff by the end where he's interacting with himself.
Yeah. Like I said, there are some of the later ones that I just wasn't really a fan of. The Ace King Kong thing, I thought that was clever because he comes in and he was like, he was a fighter pilot, all this kind of stuff. And, come to find out the big mission that they have is shooting King Kong off the Empire State Building. I thought that was clever.
Yeah.
But there was a bit where he went into, we're going to fight back against all these aliens taking our jobs. And I'm just like, whoa, we went all of a sudden white supremacy, right wing, xenophobic here. And I'm like, I don't know if we're supposed to be behind this character or not, because I'm not.
Yeah.
And that made me feel real kind of squirmy for a second. And then there was also a weird editing thing that they did at the end there when they showed the monkey dying or whatever. It was weird. Yeah. And then there's a thing where he plays and he even calls the guy a bad seed in the family. But
I think it's even written on the mailbox. It's just like the meanest man in the world or something like that.
Right. But his child's name is literally Mistake.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, okay. And I mean, it's a character that he's played in other films, a voice that we've seen him do in other films. But wasn't a whole lot because he's been set up as mean. I'm like, I don't know. I'm not really enjoying this because he is an asshole. And not, I mean, there's a little bit of funny there, but not a lot.
Yeah, I mean, the character himself is, interesting enough. I mean, he's a distinct character.
Right, and the character voice is entertaining.
And the character voice is interesting. Some of the bits with Mistake and having the son name Mistake, I frankly found funny in context. But yeah, the sketch doesn't really go anywhere. It's
and honestly, that's the problem with a lot of these.
Yeah,
a lot of them are very weird and aimless. I will say, outside of the first one, actually no, probably my favorite one was the Billy Boogie sketch.
Oh, really?
Because, and halfway through, I realized, oh my goodness, this kind of sounds like a song that would have been written by Flight of the Conchords.
Oh,
because it's like, Billy Boogie loves to boogie. He loves to boogie women. I'm like, I could imagine Jermaine Clement doing this song right now.
I will need to go back and give that another listen because I wasn't paying attention to the lyrics all that much. Honestly, as I was watching the Billy Boogie segment, I almost wanted to fast forward through it because it was just.
I will say at first it wasn't until I realized how much it reminded me of Flight of the Conchords that I got into it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was some weirdness in that one too.
Yeah.
But then there's like you mentioned, the card
playing
one where they're literally betting women.
Yeah.
Which is a little gross. And there's also the gag where he wins a woman and she's so happy to be with him, but then he keeps burning her face with a cigar every time he looks at her. And by the end, she's got all these cigar burns all over her face.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I get the gag. The gag on its face is I get, but I don't know. There's just something about it that it isn't funny to me anymore.
I must have turned away at the end. I noticed the gag throughout, obviously, and I was amused by it because you weren't seeing it. It was the gag was always done with the sound effect of, you know, because it was kind of.
There were a couple of times that straight up you saw the cigar make contact to her face, and you heard that. And I will say though, she rarely said "ow."
Yeah, she didn't react to
it, which was weird.
Yeah. For that segment, I'll say that like I liked the punchline at the end of it, that like his great poker player relative like it had no clue how to play cards and did not care.
Everything that he'd done before that was just a fluke.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was kind of unique. And then the last one, number one. I mean, again, I like the old man character that he does. He does that in a couple things here and there. But then they had to throw in that one character.
Yeah.
Really bad African stereotype.
For a minute, I thought we were just going to refer to that
and everything, and it's just really offensive.
I thought we were just going to like refer to him in the third person, and
I thought maybe they were just going to. Well, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
It was
Queequeg.
Wait, no, that's like I had to look this up because I thought they were calling him Queequeg, like from Moby Dick.
Right.
I think it's Queequeg or something like that. It's might be Queequeg.
I think it's Queequeg. Yeah. But yeah, I would have been much happier them just referring to that character, because in reference, you don't necessarily know what the character is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But it is just a large African-American gentleman in stereotypical African paint. It's really offensive and really like, honestly, after that, I was just like, okay, when is this one over? And
he doesn't do much for the rest of the bit other than just
it drags. There is no point to that bit at all, which I think is kind of the point of it, because the old man character he talks slow and, you know, does all of that. And so I get, but because of the presence of that character, it really turned me off. Really turned me off.
No, it's the kind of character that might hold his own for like a minute long segment on like Hey Vern, it's Ernest. He does not need like a 7-minute long sketch.
No, and honestly, I'd prefer that we not see that character again. We don't need
I meant the old man. Sorry.
The old man.
No.
No, I'm like, I don't want him to have a segment. But the old and I think in most other things that he's done in much smaller doses.
Exactly. Yeah.
So is there anything else that you wanted to hit on with anything before we kind of get into the rest of the podcast?
Off the top of my head, real quick, I guess we can double check this as we go on. But if that kid who played young Ernest in the last sketch is technically the only other person to play Ernest P. Worrell other than Jim Varney.
Well, I don't know if the guy who won the chance to be Ernest, if they gave him the same name.
Well, I mean, he never did anything with it. That's what I'm saying.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I was gonna say, honestly, I was wondering, because I was like, I know he won the contest. Yeah. But I don't know if they actually ever used him.
Yeah, as far as I mean, we can check for a future episode here, but I mean, so he certainly never made any movies or TV shows.
Oh no, he might have done like a local commercial
ad or something. But at least in any of the real Ernest productions, the movies and the TV and whatnot, that if that kid was the only other, I think it said his name was Michael Cisneros, who went on to do like some other, his IMDb page is not just that special, but there's not much to it. But if he's the only other person who's technically played Ernest P. Worrell. Let's see, do I have any other notes here? Just this. It got mentioned, I think, in that 87 Times article that at the time Ernest Goes to Camp came out, there was an Ernest fan club. At the time, which the sort of thing you had back in pre-internet days,
I was
especially.
gonna say, it doesn't surprise me, honestly.
Doesn't surprise me. I was supposed to learn there were apparently 20,000 members of the Ernest fan club.
Whoa!
And
No
Ernest
wonder they
Goes to
made
Camp
movies.
came out.
Jeez.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Yeah. Yeah. That is something.
Yeah.
Was there something else?
He had, no, just he had that kind of a fan base, really. Again, built off of local commercials up until that point. Well, and one direct-to-video special.
Right. All right. So, going forward, we're gonna have a number of segments. One in particular we're not really going to use, but I will introduce it. Every episode, we will hand out a specific award called the Neldy Award, which is named for one of Ernest's indelible characters, Aunt Nelda. Basically, the reason for this award would either be your favorite or just most interesting character, because I would say of Ernest's characters, Aunt Nelda is one of the most interesting at the very least. Your track record with her might be different. But at the very least, one of the most interesting characters that Jim Varney does, as well as it's hard to know who's doing that character. Like I said, the way that it's comes across. But yeah, so but because we are talking today about things that only included Ernest, and I will say probably just because it would be too easy, Ernest won't be eligible for that award, because otherwise you'd probably just give it to Ernest every time.
Yeah.
But because all we have really is Ernest in any of these things,
we have character. We have the other Worrells from the family album.
Yeah, I'm not gonna give it to any of them. Maybe Billy Boogie, but that's stretching it.
I would like to give it to the Rod Serling voice from that ad.
Okay. All right. So Lauren giving out a Neldy to the Rod Serling voice. Not bad. Another segment that we will be doing is the moment. Basically, your again, either your favorite or most interesting moment. And so I guess for this, it would be your favorite or most interesting commercial. And I think I'm gonna give it to the "Look What Mr. Gravity Did," because that's the one that stuck with me the most. Or mean old Mr. Gravity. Yeah, that's the one that definitely stuck with me the most. Did you have a favorite in particular, Lauren?
Favorite ad? It probably would be either the one where he visits Vern in the hospital.
Okay. Yeah,
and
that one's pretty good.
Yep, that was I think that was an ad for according to my notes here, MASH, like repeats of MASH.
Oh yeah, no, he does specifically tell him there are repeats of MASH every weeknight, and yeah, all that stuff.
And yeah, Vern has his foot in a cast, strung up, and Ernest is leaning on him, and and you can hear Vern vocalizing off camera how much this is.
It's great.
There's also, I forget if it's in Greatest Hits or if it's in another video I saw. There was some behind the scenes footage of shooting that.
It was in the second
that's in the second volume. It'd either be that one or there was one he did for ice cream where he was locked in an ice cream freezer. And then
don't get help.
Yes, don't get help made the first joke, and then it's topped by the Vern sticking the broom
in so he can't
now
get out. I'm locked in with all this purity ice cream. Don't get help.
Don't get help.
Yeah.
Yes.
Vern, you left your broom, Vern. Yeah. All right. So the final segment is really more of a question. It is the most important question in this podcast. So important that Ernest himself asked it constantly. So, Lauren, my question to you, when it comes to Ernest's commercial work and early stuff, even the family album, do you or do you not know what he means, Vern?
I think I know so much more now than I did before the last 3 hours of footage I watched. Yes.
but did you enjoy this? Was this a fun experience for you? For
I did. This was a lot of fun. Like I said, you wouldn't think watching 2 hours worth of commercials would sort of be engaging, but frankly, one of the fascinating things about it was that and granted, this is because they were choosing 2 hours worth of 2,600 commercials.
Yeah,
but it didn't feel repetitive. Like that was some of the like I said, the comic wit, the originality of it was that it kept changing things up and finding new things to do with this character and these products.
Yeah.
It's why I said earlier why I think he'd kill it on one of the like TikTok or YouTube or wherever, because he could just Jim Varney is just the type of person who I'm certain could just keep churning out material like that day after day.
No, I mean, I will say, while Family Album was not my favorite, I mean, there were definitely, unfortunately, if we were just talking about Family Album, I would probably have to say no. I don't get what he means. I don't know what they were doing here. It was not his best work. But if we put it together all as a whole, I loved the commercial stuff. That stuff was just great. Family Album was just, it was aimless. You could tell that they were just kind of giving him the opportunity to kind of spread his wings character wise, be creative, do a little bit more. And I like the fact that he got to do that. But I didn't like a lot of what came out of it. Like I said, more problematic elements than I was hoping for. And I will say, I think when Family Album originally came out, it did well, at least well enough for them to want to push forward into doing films. So I think it was successful to a certain extent for them. But I can say, at least now, I don't think it would have been as successful. Like I said, there's just some things now that wouldn't have flown now. And I do think that overall it is weaker work from it as a whole. But like I said, the commercial stuff itself was enough. And, there were 2 volumes of that, only one of the Family Album. So as a whole, I will say, yes, I know what he means. I'm right here with him. I'm along for this ride.
Yeah. Excellent.
All right. So it is time now to give you guys the opportunity to get into contact with us. Obviously, you can find us on Twitter and Instagram at the Flying Cow Pod. At the Flying Cow Pod. You can also email us at theflyingcowpod@gmail.com. We are on Facebook as well. You can find the group. Don't forget to check out all of the podcasts that we have, whether it be discussions or Nostalgia Cow or anything else. Check all of that stuff out. Obviously, right now, this is going to be free for everyone. But next month, it won't be. So if you enjoyed hearing this and you'd like to hear our take on the films as a preview, the next film that we are going to review is one that a lot of people might not have heard of, It is actually the first feature film to feature the character of Ernest. It is called Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam. Yeah, just look it up. The poster for that and itself is enough to be intriguing. So if you want to hear about that, check us out. Become a patron on patreon.com/theflyingcow. It is right there. We got a lot of great tiers for a lot of our podcasts, a lot of different things that you can check out. This is, like I said, our Patreon exclusive podcast that after this month will be exclusive on the Patreon at the $10 level. And if you are at the $10 level, and this month you are getting the video version, of this podcast on the $10 level. But next month, it will be moving to the $15 level. So if you want to continue seeing this podcast in video form, move up to the $15 level and check us out. We'd love to see you there. Lauren, is there anything that you would like to share? Anything that you would like the people to know about?
I was just going to suggest for anyone listening, if you want to watch Dr. Otto and the Riddle of the Gloom Beam before we do that next episode, you can find that. I think it's on YouTube, free with ads. I think it's
also on Tubi.
I think it's also on Tubi. It appears that it might also be on Pluto TV. It's basically, like you said earlier, Clay, it's basically out there for free streaming apps.
Yeah.
You can type it in just in case you want to experience this film for yourself before you want to hear our discussion of it.
Yeah. All right. So, again, thanks to everyone for listening to this. I hope that you join us for more episodes. I hope that you join us over on Patreon. But until then, move. Know what I mean?
Mm.